But no one's done worse to me than what Eric Bischoff did, and we sat and had beers the other night.
Right. That's true.
Fired me for going to my son's wrestling tournament. Sued me. Got up in front of 65 people and said he'd break me. Ruin my family. Ask Booker T. Ask him a speech in front of everybody. Another time he got up and said the only three guys in this room that ever drew any money are Hogan, Savage, and Piper. I was sitting right there.
Now, how do you get past something like that all these years later?
I've learned it's not worth it to be upset. Could you get over it? No. I feel like I'm a better man for getting over it, but that's a lot to get up in front of the whole locker room and tell them that they're going to break me, ruin my family, everything. As a corporate, I would have been a millionaire. Mark, I would be so cool right now if I had rode that lawsuit out, because ultimately Turner paid everybody. And this is a executive vice president saying that in front of 65 people.
No, I give you credit. You are the better man for having done that, and I don't think I could do it, to be very honest.
I don't know if anybody could.
Well, you know what I have, though, Nate? I have Irish Alzheimer's. I forget everything but a grudge.
And I still remember terminal stare.
So do I. Now, one last thing. We got to tell you.
Hey, guys, it's the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, 16 times your world champion, and the host of WHOOoo Nation, along with my multi-millionaire friend, entrepreneur, playboy,
oh my gosh,
et cetera, and the second wealthiest man in the state of Alabama behind Dr. James Andrews.
Oh my gosh,
Conrad Thompson. And Conrad, as we talked about all week long, today we got a big one.
Today is maybe the biggest guest we've ever had on WHOOoo Nation. I'm sure,
and I mean, we're talking about Kevin Sullivan, Lawrence Taylor, Bruce Pritchard,
Kurt Angle, on down the line.
Today we got a guy that's been involved in more wrestling than I have in half the period of his lifespan, and been in some really good stuff and some stuff that probably, we all have regrets about. And that's me pounding my ring. I'm sorry. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, today, Eric Bischoff, who I'm proud to call today my friend. And I'm going to say a couple of things before we get going, because if we're going to give you guys the best of, we're going to ask questions and have fun. But let me remind everybody that Eric Bischoff got me going in a bad time when I had a personal tragedy in my life. First guy to call me, if not the first, one of the first calls I took. And helped me out when I went to Australia with that wicked fourth witch wife of mine. With Hulk, and we've all seen some stuff, and I've had on a personal relationship with Lori, his beautiful wife. I talk to his son Garrett at least once every 2 weeks, and I've been out with him and his beautiful daughter Montana many times. So we're friends today. We did war, we did feud, we did disagree, and on a personal note, the worst thing he ever asked me to do was in Birmingham, Alabama, when he asked me to put who over? What's the guy's name again? The Mexican guy. What was his name?
Conan.
Oh! And I said,
we're
in Birmingham. I said, why am I doing this? He said, because I'm telling you to. So I'll get that off my chest. And where's Conan now? Jesus Christ. Excuse me, Conan. I'm sorry, the Mexican guy. I'm not Donald Trump. I'm just... There were so many of you on Raw at one time.
We're off to a good start.
Yeah, Arn's story was that... Arn's story was that we had 400 Mexican workers on the show to protect the NWO.
Wow.
Holy cow. Anyway.
Eric, we're excited to have you, buddy. What are you up to these days? What's going on?
Oh, well, I'm in I'm in Wyoming. My wife and I have a home here and have had one since around 98 or so. And we bounce back and forth. I watch the ducks. As soon as the ducks head south for the winter, we kind of follow them, and then we go down to Arizona where we've got a place, and we just kind of bounce back and forth. So I'm enjoying life. My business partner and I, Jason Hervey, are producing TV shows, and I got a little beer brand I'm doing around the country, and just enjoying life, really.
Well, you're in a good spot. Is Lori still doing? She's doing some aerobic stuff, right?
Yeah, she stays really busy. You know, she's got her own kind of life coaching practice that she's been doing now for a couple of years.
Okay, good. Yeah.
She's been doing that for a while and has been studying at different holistic health centers around the country. So she's staying real active, and we're both really enjoying life now, probably as much or more than we ever have.
How does studying in holistic health, what? Was the word?
Holistic health.
Yeah, how does that work with you?
You know what, Rick? I've never, I've always flirted with getting in shape and working out, but I've never really.
No, I was with you when you were training for the marathon. I remember all that.
Yeah,
but it never interrupted your 20 quarters a day.
Well, that's
where I was going with the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, that's been kind of the story of my life, is I'm either, really intense about working out, or then I'll take, 4 months off and 5 months off and live like a sailor on shore leave.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, it's hard. I remember when Wahoo McDaniel said to me one time when Wahoo was getting older and I was just a young kid. And I said, why don't you come to the gym? He said, boy, I'm through working out. I've been working out 40 years. And I said, I get it, It's hard to get, you have to be really motivated to get yourself to go every day and train and eat right and everything else. And I mean, I'm kind of living vicariously through Ashley right now, but it's a battle every day. As I'm sitting here right now drinking a Diet Coke, and Conrad's got a Miller Lite in his hand.
Oh my gosh!
Oh, sorry.
Well, Lori's been a great influence because my diet is. I've got a really great diet and have had for a long time. She's very committed to that, and I've started working out quite a bit recently. Just cardio and stuff. I'm not throwing any weights around, but I've dropped about 30 pounds in the last 6 weeks or so.
Have you really?
Yeah, I'm down to about.
When I saw you last time, you weren't even heavy. When I saw you in San Diego, you weren't heavy at all.
Yeah, I kind of go up and down, but I'm down to about 190 pounds, which is probably lighter than I've been since 1992 or 3. But I feel really good.
Well, cool. Well, good for you. And please pass my regards on to Lori in Montana. I talked to Garrett, so I know how he's doing. How about that beard, man? What the hell? That's so un-Eric Bischoff like. I'm just hoping that stuff goes out of style because I can't wait for him to shave that thing off. Yeah, God, his wife's beautiful. Holy cow, there they go. They're a great couple.
She's a sweetheart too. She's a really, really nice person.
I remember.
So, is this the most interesting relationship in professional wrestling, where you guys, when you read your book, Rick, you see that you were kind of instrumental in helping Eric come into power when the powers that be came to you and asked your opinion.
Well, here's the story. I think Eric remembers this. I remember I came back, Eric, from New York, right? And Ole Anderson says to me, "What good are you to me after doing
now that you lost on national TV,
after putting over Kurt Hennig on national TV last night? It was the second Raw ever." And I was so pissed off at him that I walked next door to Bob Dew and I go, "Bob, it's me or him." He said, "Well, who can run the company?" I said, "There's a guy downstairs right now that's pretty creative." Do you remember that, Eric?
Yeah, no, I do. It was a crazy time.
Yeah, but I said, Ole had lost it. He was kind of like Vern.
It had passed him by.
It had passed him by. I mean, what the hell? I'm on Raw. WCW was in a terrible spot.
Second fiddle.
And Eric was down there and had just come from Minneapolis. You've been there for a while and doing all the TV. And I go, he's got a great idea. He's contemporary. He's fun, and he likes to eat the Chinese food with me and eat kimchi. So how much of that did we have at noon? Good Lord.
Yeah. No, it was a crazy time, and, I look back at it now, and, it's hard to imagine all the different things that transpired. The Bill Watts era, coming in and going, and all the controversy.
Well, Bill's the one that hired me, and I came back and I fired Bill for some crack about Hank Aaron.
Yeah.
And then Ole was there, and then I just said, I can't work with this. I went, and I've known Dew forever. I said, Bob, I just can't. Didn't come back for this.
Right.
So then, go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just want to.
No, it's funny we're talking about Ole, and and I've told this story before, but it's worth telling again, especially here because you knew him so well, and you knew Blackjack Mulligan as well.
Yeah.
You were close to him, but I had hired and this is after I got a little bit of control and kind of was in management. And I liked Ole. You're right. He was very much like Vern, and he was just so stubborn and pig-headed. But there was something about him that I just really liked and respected. So he certainly was an office, CNN center, South Tower kind of a guy. But I didn't want to lose him either, so I sent him down to the power plant. I figured, well, he can't hurt anything down there. And he really was good at teaching because he was passionate about the art form. So I thought, well, that's a good place for him. He'll be happier and blah, 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 blah. Well, let me shut this phone off. I moved him down there, but I had recently hired Blackjack Mulligan. And I did it, I don't want to say as a favor because that's disrespectful, but I wasn't looking to hire someone like Blackjack, but he came along at a certain time. And I don't remember who it was that told me he was a little bit down on his luck. And I thought, with all the years of skill and experience and all that, he'd be a good guy to have down at the power plant. So I hired him. And Blackjack was a very, very loyal guy. Yeah. And one day, Ole didn't like the fact that I moved him out of the South Towers and the fact that I was gaining control. He just resented it. And I understood it. I didn't take it personally. But Ole made the mistake by going down to the power plant and just bad-mouthing me up one end and down the other, telling everybody who would listen what the crap I was. And Blackjack knocked him out.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not the first time, Eric. That's gone down. I've seen that happen 5 times.
Rick, Blackjack
you don't screw around with Jack Mulligan, man.
He had a fist. He probably still does, the size of a small refrigerator.
Well, he's dying as we speak.
No, I've kept up a little bit.
He weighs almost 500 pounds.
Oh my goodness!
I was with Mike Rotundo, his son-in-law, yesterday, and I keep up with Jack. I can't say enough good about Jack Mulligan, but boy, going back to how tough he was. I've seen him slap Ole over the years. I not punch him, but I've seen him slap Ole at least 5 times. I did not see that, but I don't doubt that for a second because Jack. I was there when he sucker punched Harley Race and Andre the Giant. Jack was just.
But it says a lot about his loyalty to take up for Eric, at the power
well, he didn't like
that.
Ole anyway, and if you gave him a job, if you gave him a job, and I'm sure he thought highly of the fact you gave him the opportunity, and Jack's a loyal guy. But there's no denying how tough he is, man. Holy cow! My greatest story is he, before you came along there, Eric, when George Scott was booking, he hired Jack. This is right after, I'm trying to think, after Crockett sold out. And to be an agent. And
George Scott was booking even then for WCW? I thought he had left once WWF
he
came back.
He just came for a couple months.
Okay.
And so he hired Jack, and we were in Marietta. I tell this story all the time because it's great. And Jack was wearing a sport coat and tie, and he was sweating.
Trying to be corporate.
Smoking a Salem cigarette and all that. And he was telling Luger that it's phenomenal because I thought he was going to die right there. He was telling Lex Luger that he had to wrestle
Dutch
Mantell. And Luger looked at him and said, why would a Lex Luger, like in the third person, wrestle Dutch Mantell? and Lex could say that, and you know the mentality I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And Jack puffed on that Salem and put it on the floor and stopped and walked out the door. I thought he was going to punch Luger. I said, I looked at Luger and said, Jesus, that's not a smart thing to say to a guy like him. And Jack quit. He walked out the door.
Never saw him again.
He said to me, he called me and I said, I can't do this. These kids don't have a clue.
Perfect example of just a clash of cultures.
Oh yeah.
Lex was a new generation guy at that time, and Blackjack.
But the third person thing it exhausted everybody. But that's what it was, and it's the way people talk. But Jack was instead of smacking him, which I've seen him do God, what was the karate guy's name? He almost killed in Birmingham. Who was that
Flynn?
guy? Huh?
Flynn? Ernest Miller?
No. Swanker or Swinger, I can't remember. But yeah, Jack he just had a real short attention span and was impatient with people that wouldn't listen to authorities.
So circling back to when you took over for WCW, Eric, I recently saw a shoot interview or a disc, or I'm not exactly sure where it was I saw it, but you made a comment. What was it like when you took over a company that was in the red and you were excited to be at the helm, and you commented something along the lines of, knowing what I know now, I'm not sure that I would have been so eager to jump at that opportunity. But back then, I just didn't know any better. And I'm kind of interested to hear your perspective on that, because at the time when you took over, WCW had never turned a profit. And now you go from kind of TV guy, and I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but TV sales guy, to now you're running the company. And it had previously been ran by, old school traditional wrestling guys. And now here you are, and it's already losing money. What was that like?
Well, I was a lot younger. It was a big opportunity, and I had no fear at that time. From a career perspective, I had everything to gain and nothing to lose. And I had known, I talked to several people, that were senior management at Turner Broadcasting, and after the Bill Watts mess and all the controversy surrounding it. That was really quite embarrassing for the Turner organization, and quite frankly, Ted Turner himself, who was the only real supporter of WCW. Everybody else in the North Tower that was a member of the the Turner Executive Committee, wanted to pull the plug on WCW, and had wanted to pull the plug on it for a number of years. Ted was the only reason it didn't happen. But when the Bill Watts mess hit the fan, that was kind of the last straw. And essentially what I was told by Bill Shaw before taking the job was, look, if we don't turn this company around, and if we don't prevent the kind of embarrassing, headline-grabbing messes that had just been caused by Bill Watts, Ted himself is going to pull the plug on this company. So at that point, I felt like, okay, I've got nothing to lose, because if somebody doesn't do something, if we don't turn this thing around, I'm going to end up losing my gig anyway. And I just had no fear of failure at that time and at that age. That's the best way to say it. I did not have a fear of failure. I had a thirst and a hunger for success and survival, but I had zero fear of failure. Now, at this stage in my life, at 60 years old and having, failed as often as I've succeeded, I probably look at it a little differently. But back then, man, it was fresh meat.
So circling back a few years before that, I don't know how many people really know this, but you actually had a tryout with WWE to work as an on-air personality. How did that go about, and what happened there?
Well, I had been working for Vern Gagne since about 1987. That's when I started with Vern. And, I didn't know. I mean, I wasn't completely naive to what was going on with Vern, but I was so excited to work with Vern in particular, because I wrestled in high school in Minnesota, and had met Vern and kind of looked up to him. He was like the local hero, and watched everybody come through it. I was a huge wrestling fan, so the opportunity to work for Vern Gagne was a big deal for me, and because it was such a big deal, I didn't look too closely at what he was doing and whether it was a good career move for me or not. I was just passionate and excited. Now, when Vern hired me, he was kind of he'd been getting his ass kicked pretty good. Financially, he was funding the company, out of his own, personal retirement and wealth and the money that he had made over the years. He wasn't really making any money. He had lost a lot of his big-name talent, Gene Okerlund, Hulk Hogan, Kurt Hennig, so many Rick Rude, so many people had left to go to the WWF at that time, now WWE, that Vern was hanging on by a thread. I didn't know that, at least not to the extent I should have. But the good news was, when I went to work for Vern, he hired me as, syndication sales. I was a salesman when Vern hired me. That's what I did. And he put me into syndication, and I did okay at that. And then I got to learn a little bit about production, and I eventually learned how to edit. I learned how to run a camera, and I ended up, serendipitously, in front of a camera, just because the lead announcer ended up getting thrown in jail the night before. So I got exposed to all of these elements, within the business of the wrestling business. But as exciting as that was, Vern had gotten to the point by 1991 where he was done. I mean, it was. I had gone for months and months and months without a paycheck. I was facing, or I wasn't facing. I was in the midst of a personal bankruptcy. I was having my cars literally, repossessed out of my driveway. I mean, it was a bad time. I had 2 young kids that I was feeding rice and beans because that's all we could afford, and it was tough. And then I saw an ad in the Minneapolis paper that the WWF had put in there looking for an announcer. And I went to Vern and said, Vern, do you mind? Out of respect, because I was, close to Vern on a personal level, and just respected the hell out of him, and Greg. And they both said, do what you got to do, Eric. You got to feed your family. So I went down, and I wasn't excited about leaving AWA because of my relationship there and my comfort. But at the same time, I knew that, trying out for WWF or WWE now could be a game changer for me and my family. So I was excited. And it was, I still remember to this day, I flew into LaGuardia the other day, and I was coming down the same terminal that I did back in 1991, and I reflected back on that. It was an amazingly exciting time, but I sucked. I look back at it now, and people send me that clip, and I look at it and go, oh, my God. That was horrible, but it was exciting.
Who were his announcers back then?
He had, Bobby Heenan, Gorilla Monsoon, Jesse Ventura.
Gotcha. Okay.
Tony Schiavone was there for a little while.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out where Tony, because Tony called me. He was just dying to come back. He was there about 6 months, and the schedule was killing him. So
yeah, I think the role that they were, and I could. It was a long time ago, so I don't know if I remember this, but I think it was more of a, hosting the third string syndication, type shows, and kind of the same thing I was hired for at WCW, quite frankly. Kind of being the third string or fourth string announcer, doing some international, tracks and things like that. I certainly wasn't up for, the primetime shows.
So, Eric, talking about that WWE tryout or WWF at the time, is that something you would have met Vince at, or Kevin Dunn, or who would you conduct that with, the whole tryout concept?
It was kind of weird. Now, I think if I met Vince, it was very briefly. Like, hey, how are you? Thanks for coming in, blah, 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 blah. It was a very, very brief exchange. And then he went one way, and I was taken into the studio. And I never met Kevin Dunn face-to-face at that point, but I believe it was Vince and Kevin, and I could be wrong, but I believe it was Vince and Kevin who were, I was standing on camera in front of a chroma key screen that had looked like a big crowd behind me, and they were just talking to me over the intercom saying, okay, now do this. Okay, now try to do this. And here's a broom. Interview the broom. And in between that, they would ask me questions. How's Vern doing? What's going on? Is he still got the big house out in Mountain, Minnesota, type of thing. Conversational. And then they would give me direction, and I would attempt to do what they were looking for. But it was pretty quick, really.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I know a lot of folks have always kind of wondered what the behind the scenes of that looks like, because, everyone is fascinated with your story, Eric, that you went from, television guy to then really igniting the Monday Night Wars in the hottest era in the history of wrestling. And but before all that happened, this is something we get requested to talk about a lot. And Rick, we've never talked about this on the show, but people want to talk about North Korea and how the hell that came about. And you've told me, privately, Rick, how weird that was for you. But Eric, share the story. What happened to,
Well, let me just, first of all, I'm going to interject here because I remember exactly as we sat at that Chinese restaurant I referred to earlier, when somebody looked at me and said, you're going to be more famous than Lawrence Taylor. And I said, really? Okay. So what does that mean exactly? Yeah. By the way, he's got 2 Super Bowl rings, and I'm going to North Korea. I'm going because Eric goes, let me put it to you like this, Rick. George Foreman won't go. Hogan said no, and Sting said no. So what do you think? I said, I'm going to go. First of all, it was me, Eric, Muhammad Ali, Jane, Ted, and former President Jimmy Carter. And by the time we got to the airport, it was me, Eric, and Sonny Ono, who, by the way, I want to kill. I'm sure you do, too. We'll discuss him later on. He's another one of your mercy children like Paige. Good Lord, Sonny Ono, the car salesman from Iowa. Good Lord. He's another guy sued the company and got rich. I don't know why I didn't keep my lawsuit in place. Everybody got paid.
Oh
Jeez. It's terrible. Freight train, all these guys. Eric gave him a job, and when the company closed, they all sued him. Oh, God. Anyway, go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry. I have to remind you these things because I was texting Eric. These guys are telling me, I wasn't texting them, I was calling them panicking. Meet me in the fire, meet me in the hall or in the fire escape, man. These guys want me to say, remember Eric, they wanted me to say something to Mike Chinoy or whatever the guys was from CNN about how I knew North Korea could beat the United States if we ever went to war. And I was going, Eric, I can't say that.
Wait. You need to expound on that. Talk me through what you just said.
They partitioned. They put Eric.
North Korea government.
The North Korean government put Eric and the guys at one hotel. They put me at another, and they put Steiner or not. They put Eric with the Steiners and Norton, who got in trouble for talking on the phone. And then so they come to me and they say before we leave, and they kept us. Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 days longer than they were supposed to, and. They wanted me to make a statement to the effect that North Korea would, if they elected to go to war with the United States, would demolish the United States. And I said, Eric, I can't say that. He said, well, try and figure out something. So I said, well meet me on the fire escape with you, man, so we could talk. I was so paranoid because I shut off Scott Norton's phone.
Follow up on that. Scott Norton got in trouble talking on the phone.
Talking to Tammy, his wife, and he was, complaining about the conditions. Probably with a little language stronger than what I just mentioned, and they turned off his phone. You remember that, Eric, right?
Well, they turned off his phone. They wouldn't service his room. They stripped his bed.
Yeah, it was terrible. I mean, more to it than that. See,
they did everything but ransack the entire hotel room, and that was the government doing it because of what they heard him say to his wife over the phone.
Yeah. Well, do you remember me asking you what I could do for a choice of words besides that?
Yeah, I mean, look, they did it to a lot of us. The whole trip.
I was scared to death.
And I'll go back to how the trip came about. I had, because of my proximity, if you will, to Ted Turner and some of the people around Ted, I had been approached by Antonio Inoki, and I think it was '94, to see if I could put Antonio Inoki in touch with Muhammad Ali because they had lost touch over the years. And I said, sure, I'm happy to help you do that. So Antonio Inoki flew over from Japan with a group of other people from the office, and they met. Muhammad was going to be in Denver that week. So Muhammad was going to be in Denver. I flew in with Sonny Ono, and to act as an interpreter if and when necessary. And we all met in Denver, and it was more or less a photo op for Antonio Inoki more than anything else. But it went really, really well. They hadn't seen each other in many, many years, so it went well. And then about 6 months later, or whenever it was, I lose track of the timeline, but at some point afterwards, I got a phone call from Brad Ringens, who was working. Brad's from Minnesota. He's super guy, amateur wrestler, made the Olympic team in Greco-Roman, really amazing guy.
76 Olympian, bronze medal,
yep.
Montreal, yep.
And he and I had been friends since high school. He wrestled. He was a year older than me, and he wrestled at a different school than I did. But we'd see each other at regional tournaments, and I never made it to the state, but obviously Brad did. but we knew of each other. We weren't tight, but we knew of each other pretty well. Anyway, long story short, Brad called me because he was working for New Japan and said, hey, Mr. Inoki, would like to invite, you and a group of your people over and be a part of this peace festival that he's sponsoring and a part of over in North Korea. And kind of what I said to you earlier, I just had no fear. I said, wow, North Korea? Nobody goes to North Korea. That means I want to go. I want to do something nobody's ever done before. and I thought it was exciting. And I thought, well, I better check and make sure I'm not going to go to jail for that, because they were kind of on the list of countries that, if you're a U.S. citizen, you can't go to. So I checked it out and talked to some people I knew at CNN, and they said, yeah, it's illegal. You're not supposed to do it. I said, well, what happens if I do? He said, the worst thing they're going to do is lock you in a room and ask you questions for about 5 hours and slap you in the wrist. I said, well, hell, then we're going. And I put together the group, with WCW, and Rick's right. I asked around, and I didn't want to force anybody to go, obviously, but we wanted the biggest names we could bring. And a couple people, Hogan just scratched his Fu Manchu and said, nah, brother, can't make that one. Yeah. And a couple other people were just, they were just too nervous about it. And that was
so fine. You came to the mark.
No, but Ricky, look, it was the idea of going somewhere big and
let me
crowd.
As we told the story, I've got to tell you, because, okay, number one, first class airfare for me and my wife and Reed. Remember?
Yep.
And is Lori with
Reed to North Korea?
No, I took him to Tokyo.
Okay.
Okay, but when we got back to Japan, we had some major fun. I mean, Eric, I'm not the Seahawk Hotel and all that, right?
Yeah.
And then is Lori with you right now?
No.
And of course, Beth brought her best girlfriend, Susan Beck, who ooh la 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 la.
Okay, let's talk about wrestling. 195,000 people. Come on.
I want to make sure Eric remembers all this.
I'm giving Eric a tag.
Oh yeah. And of course, it was phenomenal.
You know, a lot of people listen to this, right?
I didn't say anything wrong.
I'm just saying. Okay.
Hey, Susan, if you're guilty, you're guilty.
We love you, Lori. I don't know what to say right now. I'm just gonna lay out.
I didn't say they did anything, but
No, I was just complimenting her. She's a lovely lady.
But we went to the Seahawk Hotel when we came back, and we went to that festival, and like a mark, I gave Inoki a piece of jewelry I had. Remember, Eric? Yeah, so I never got that back or anything else. But we did have a good time. And I mean, one thing about Eric and I, man, we like to have fun, and we have had some damn good times over the years. I'm still pissed off about you getting me, that little punk Ellis. I bought that damn that $32,000 motorcycle I rode for a mile and a half that I never got a title from Ellis. It's Sturgis.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, please. Well, go ahead.
Okay, wait.
I'm changing the draft.
You did. All right, we'll circle back to
Eric
North
and I have had a lot of, in spite of all our disagreements.
You went to a Road Wild deal in Sturgis, bought a motorcycle.
I went to Sturgis, and everybody was having fun. Eric said, come ride the motorcycles, Mongo, and everybody were having a ball. I go, I haven't got a motorcycle. He said, well, they got them on display over here. So the guy wanted $32,000 for this iron horse tricked out. So I gave Ellis $32,000, and I was riding the bike up the road the next day to Cheyenne. And by the way, not that this matters, but it's a great story, and it's part of the story, which is important. I'm the only guy in the world that could find a massage parlor for me and Tony Schiavone in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Now, a good massage parlor?
Oh, yeah, 30 miles out of town.
But a good one.
Yeah, I mean, they served, sake and Chinese food or Japanese food. That was great.
Rub and tug?
I don't know what the tug, but rub. Selective memory on the tug. but no, Eric and I, for all our arguments, have had some damn good times together. Jesus.
So you bought a motorcycle, drove it a mile and a half.
I rode it 180 miles to Cheyenne.
Where's the motorcycle now? What'd you do with it?
Oh, that's in divorce number 3.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Who can keep up?
Yeah, I can't. You're right. Yeah. By the way, congratulations on staying married, Eric. You're one of the few, and God bless you for it, that has handled, whose wife has negotiated all this crap and done everything we've done. I mean, from the, working for Eric, we would stay at the Grand Floridian. I mean, in a suite. How rough was that when we were doing Disney? Or we stayed at the, what was the other property with the running river, Eric, that was so nice?
Oh, God, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
And we went to the Swan every night for sushi, you and I in Oakland. I mean, it wasn't a bad gig.
It wasn't at all.
No, we had so much fun. I mean, but
it was the yacht club, Rick. It was the yacht club.
The yacht club was great. I mean, are you kidding me? The wives partied all day. We went to work for a couple hours over at the park and came back and ate sushi and drank all night. I mean, karaoke, the Swan. What a great memory.
A lot.
So anyway, Conrad just stepped out for a second. The next thing, I mean, there's so much, Eric, with you and I. We could go on forever, but I always go back to when we were staying at that place on Canada Drive in Orlando, right? And twists and turns in the business and all that. But do you remember the day that Rude came in and was demanding to almost have Sting's spot?
I do. There was a lot going on. In fact, I think Rude had the title, I think, at that point.
Yeah, well, I don't know if he did or not. I mean, I just, I feel terrible about what happened to him in his personal life and that, but it was difficult back then. Because I remember he walked you out to the car and opened the trunk. I just have a great memory. Remember, the gun was in the trunk and told you whatever he said to you. I mean, it was terrible.
Well, what was funny is, I had known Rick since
high school. Yeah, you guys are all together.
We all kind of grew up in the same zip code, so to speak, and hung out at the same bars. And we didn't hang out together at that time, but we had a lot of mutual friends and acquaintances. And I'd see him on weekends, and I was pretty aware of Rick's capabilities as far as being a tough guy and all that.
Yeah, he was.
And then as once we started working together, I always got along really, really well with Rick. It was probably because of the Minnesota connection. In fact, he and I rode together right after I first got hired by WCW. He and I rode, down to Macon TV together and Gainesville TV together, and we started becoming pretty close friends. And and I don't even remember the details of what led up to, that situation in Orlando, but I remember he had physical control over the belt. And I needed it back.
That's what it was. And he was like telling you and me, remember he was going to kill me in Philadelphia. Remember that night he came in the locker room?
Yeah, I brought Barry Windham in there, and I said, Barry, just, whatever happens. Don't jump in until it's absolutely necessary. But if it's going to be, permanent injuries, just be around.
Yeah, no, he was going to kill me because he thought everybody was against him.
Yeah,
and it is what it was. I mean, he was impaired in the ring, and it's like I loved Kerry Von Erich, but Kerry was impaired a lot, right? And Rick was getting to that point, and I'm not sure what happened, but he was like screaming at me, and then he was hollering at Eric, and nothing ever happened. But it was just, one of those things that was an awkward situation for everybody involved, and. But what I was telling you, you missed the thing. We were in Orlando, and we did these booking things, and it was me and Kevin and Eric and whoever else, and it was like an easy gig. We had a lot of fun in Orlando, right? But Rude came up and got Eric and took him outside. And did he point the gun at you, or did he just have it in the car?
No, he knew. I told him. I said, Rick, I got to get the title back. Enough is enough, And he and I ended up walking out to his car. And I don't know why I wasn't afraid. Maybe I was too stupid.
Well, I was afraid for you.
I just, and maybe it was because deep down inside, I knew Rude wasn't really. He was hot at his situation. He was angry at a lot of things, but I had never really done anything to him. And look, Rick
none of us had.
Rick Rude could have torn my head off and not even dropped the beer that was in his other hand while he was doing it. Wow. So and I knew that. But whatever reason, I walked out to his car. He opens up his trunk, and there's a belt sitting there right next to a 357. And he just kind of looked in the trunk, and he looked at me, and he reached in, and I thought, well, here it goes.
Yeah.
And he grabbed the belt, and he handed it to me. And I think that, he made a statement, and that was the end of it. Nothing happened after that, really. But it was an awkward moment.
Yeah, the whole thing was awkward. Yeah, it's funny because I've told people these stories, and Eric can vouch for it. The problem, this is that's why this could be like a 3-hour podcast.
It really could. Yeah.
The problem is that when Hulk came, right, he wouldn't work with Vader, and he called Rick the Tasmanian Devil. He wouldn't work with Rick. And to this day, Hulk Hogan, after all the time in WWE and WCW, Hulk never wrestled a Rick Rude. Correct, Eric?
Yeah.
Never. He wouldn't do it. He called him a Tasmanian Devil.
And he probably should have in WWF, because as soon as Warrior won, they programmed him with Rude.
Yeah, but what happened was Rude had beat up the Warrior in Savannah bad in the locker room, and that just kind of sent a message, because Warrior had said something about Rick. You know that story, right, Eric?
No, I don't know.
I had not heard that.
Okay, well, WWE apparently the Warrior made some remark, probably just in passing, but that wasn't even a time when social media was like it is now, right? But it was like one of those things like Rude's not good enough to get a shot at the title or whatever, right? Yeah. So Rude, man, he got to Savannah that night. The building we've been at, Eric, and he walked in the dressing room across the kitchen and kicked and beat up the Warrior pretty good. True story. Wow. I wasn't even there then, but if everybody knew about it, if you were in the business,
right?
Yeah, he just put himself in a position where Hulk wouldn't wrestle him at WWE, and when Hulk came with us, which was another trip when Eric and I went and got Hulk in Orlando.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. So,
let me just finish. But he to this day, Hulk and Rude have never worked in the ring, which is strange. He just refused to do it. He finally gave in to Vader, but he would not wrestle Rick. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No. I was just asking about the whole Hulk Hogan situation, because Eric Bischoff is most commonly associated with two guys, and it's Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, and one maybe for different reasons than the other. But when the WCW was finally starting to say, okay, we're going to make a run at this under Eric's tutelage, it became a situation where he wanted to go out and sign Hulk, and the talk is you kind of helped facilitate that, Rick. Talk us through how Hulk Hogan came to WCW, what that meant for WCW at the time. And that's for both guys, I guess, both Eric and Rick.
Well, I know exactly what happened. Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. Eric said, "Can you get a hold of Hogan?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "You get along with him?" I said, "I get along with him great. I had a good time in New York with him, and he was filming Thunder in Paradise in Orlando." So I called Hulk and I said, these are my exact words. I said, "I don't know what this means, and I'm not sure you're even interested, but the guy that I'm going to bring down to you is, the head of Turner now, and they got a lot of money." and that's pretty much what I said to him. He said, "Well, come on down." So we got in a car, Eric and I drove through the woods for 2 hours. And he had a trailer there, and I sat in the car or did something. Eric went and talked to Hulk for an hour and a half, and we came back, and he said, "We got him." And then about a month later or 2 months later, we did the same thing with Macho. Yeah, Macho. So we this time we flew down to St. Pete and checked that old hotel. Remember, Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Macho. But it was, and Eric had the power and he had the money, and and the company. Now Brad Siegel in particular was looking for that marquee value,
But Rick, at the time, you were the number one guy. There's a debate about this, but you were the number one guy for WCW, and you helped recruit what was the number one guy in the history of the business. So it almost is like you're signing up to be number two and doing that knowingly. Did you think about it that way, or is that not something that crossed your mind, or did you just so focused on doing good for the company that didn't really?
No, I was focused on having someone to work with. I love working with Hulk. People are going to say what they want to say, whatever. But working with Hulk Hogan was the easiest job I ever had in my life.
And I'll jump in here a little bit, Conrad, too. And there was some, and Rick's right. The background that he gave you is absolutely correct. But there had been a couple conversations with Hulk. You know, the first night, I think Rick maybe gave him my phone number for the very first conversation. And Hulk called me because I remember it was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I was in bed, and I answered the phone, and you know, Hulk's got a pretty distinctive voice, much like Rick does. And I knew immediately it was, hey, brother, Hulk Hogan here. I'm like, oh, shit, it's Hulk Hogan. And, you know, I had a real, 2-minute conversation with that. And then Rick and I went down and met with him. But the challenge was Hulk, you know, obviously Rick had set the table really, really well. And Hulk being, you know, the kind of guy that is looking for an opportunity, if it's a good one, was anxious to meet with us. And he was anxious to make a move. You know, but we had 2 things. We had more than 2 things, but we essentially had 2 or 3 things that Hulk was really interested in. One was the money. It is what it is. The other was the light schedule, because Hulk could come to work for WCW, and instead of being on the road 250 days a year or even 180 days a year, he could come in, make some big money, do 4 pay-per-views a year, a couple of TVs here and there to support those pay-per-views, and call it a day. So that was very appealing to him. And as appealing as that was, his biggest issue, though, wasn't the money or the schedule. It was who he was going to work with, because he didn't trust very many people. And I don't mean trust them, you know, as far as buying a car from them, but I mean trust them in the ring. And know that he could get in the ring with somebody and have the greatest match possible, you know, within his abilities. And he didn't want to come over to WCW, make a big splash, make a lot of headlines, and get in the ring with somebody like Vader that he didn't know, nor did he trust, or Rick Rude, or anybody that wasn't going to, you know, put 100% effort into making Hulk look as great as Hulk could look. But Hulk knew that Ric Flair was that guy. Hulk knew that if he had a program with Rick, that he could trust Rick. He knew that Rick would make him look like $1 zillion in the ring, regardless of anything. Rick would make him look the best he could possibly look. And Hulk trusts Rick. So it was, money was the condition, like one of the conditions, but the precedent was, you know, if we're going to do this, I've got to be in a long-term program with Rick Rude first. Or excuse me, with Ric Flair first. So that's, not only did Rick connect us by setting the table, but without Rick's effort in convincing Hulk that creatively, because that was another big thing, it wasn't just what happened in the ring, but Hulk was very concerned that there wasn't going to be a lot of, and you know what I mean when I say this, Rick, a lot of the political, you know, locker room kind of backstabbing. There's a million ways you can make somebody look bad without even being involved in their match.
Yeah, well, he knew that I could hate somebody, but if someone else is looking bad, that means I'm looking bad in the ring. So that isn't going to happen.
And that was those are the 2 things. It had to be Ric Flair, and the money in the schedule had to be right. And Rick was able to facilitate that.
So, Eric, I want to talk a little bit, when we're talking about Hulk Hogan and the deal you struck with him, there's been lots of speculation and talk online about, you know, what his contract looked like, and we're kind of fast-forwarding a little bit, but I recently heard in 1997, and you can tell me this is ridiculous or this is close, that Hulk Hogan had a deal structured in such a way where he made north of $20 million. Does that sound...
Not true at all. Not true at all.
Okay.
That's... You know, it's like urban legend. You know, it's like one person tells a story, then another person tells a story, and by the time the 100th person tells that story, it's a completely different story. And there's no truth to it or basis to it.
Yeah, that sounded awfully strong to me too, Eric. I didn't know, but I mean, I've never known. I've never asked Hulk, but you know, that came from one of the guys we had in the podcast that.
Well, we may have said too much, but you may have tipped the hand with that. But somebody, you know, did say, you know, candidly that it was.
He said it on the podcast.
No, well, he said it to me off the air.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well,
and I told you because we're not going to
mention
everything.
His name, but anyway, it's and I thought, boy, that doesn't sound right. But you know, anything's possible. You never know. I mean, it's like, because they were like, you know, paying people ridiculous amounts of money.
And we should touch on that.
You know what? Hulk's deal never really changed all that much. And again, this is 15, 20 years ago now, so clearly I could be mistaking in some portions of this. But here, I'll tell you right now what the basis of his deal was when he came over. He got $500,000 of pay-per-view, and he had to do like 7 to 10 TVs leading up to each pay-per-view, and he had 4 pay-per-views a year. That was his deal. Now, there was some... he had some really favorable percentages on his merchandise, that were unrealistic. But you got to remember, at the time that we brought Hulk in, WCW was making about $40 a week in merchandise on everybody told up. There was no merchandise really being sold.
That's amazing.
That hurts.
There was no license.
Yeah.
Well, and it wasn't the talent's fault. But WCW was a company. It was only about 6 or 7 years old at that time, or maybe a little older than that. The company itself just never built the business side of their business in order to sell merchandise.
Yeah,
They didn't do a good job. So, yeah, Hulk got a lion's share, 40% or whatever the percentage is. I don't remember off of his merchandise, not WCW's, just his. But it's kind of like, well, great. He's going to get 40 or 50% of his merchandise. And if we don't sign him, we're going to get 100% of nothing. So it was was it a ridiculously lopsided deal? Yes. But was it anywhere near $20 million? That's just so ridiculous. It's hard to comment on, really.
So, Eric, the talk of the whole, he got a piece of everybody else's merchandise. So if there was hypothetically a Monday Night Jericho T-shirt that was sold, Hulk saw no revenue from that. That wasn't like $1 for him, $1 for Jericho, scenario.
No.
Yeah, see, that's a myth too. I don't even think about stuff like that. But that sounded strong. I'll tell you what, Eric, you might not be aware of this. I don't know if you talked to Kevin or not, but I see Kevin Nash a lot, like at events and signings and stuff, right? And I have introduced him to some people that I work for. And so when the WWE dropped Hulk, and I was going to ask you, this is a good question to ask.
Great question.
I'm curious too. When the WWE dismissed Hulk with all the stuff that went down, I didn't know that he and Kevin Nash owned 50% of the NWO merchandise. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, somehow Hulk and Kevin Nash bought 50% of the NWO merchandise rights. And I don't know how they could have done that without you knowing about it before it went to WWE. And so when Hulk and this thing went down with the WWE and Hulk, they took the NWO merchandise off the shelf and off the website and everywhere. And Nash went crazy. He was ballistic over it. Because he owned 30, he bought Scott Hall's piece. So it was the three of them, right?
Right.
And he bought Scott Hall's piece, so he owned 34%.
And he's told me candidly what the number is, and it's a lot of money, even now in 2015 from NWO.
Big time. So Kevin went to New York and flew up there, and they've agreed to put back on one of the shirts is on now.
Yeah, the shirts are back up now, but they were down right after.
Yeah, but how could they have maneuvered that to own the NWO without you getting part of that, Eric?
Well, because number one, you got to remember, I was not part of WCW when WCW sold to WWE.
Okay.
So I hadn't really been involved. Not really. I hadn't been involved in any management decisions regarding WCW Return of Broadcasting as of September 10th, 1999. So anything that happened after September 10th, 1999, even though I may have been involved on camera and I may have been involved as a consultant creatively, from a business decision point of view, I was as remote as you could possibly be from it.
And they closed down in April of...
Yeah, end of March 2001.
2001.
Like 26th or something.
Wow. Yeah, I know. Anyway, I meant to ask you that. I thought about that because Kevin was, God, he was livid. I just couldn't figure out how they were able to negotiate that kind of a deal.
So this is.
Well, I'll tell you what. Next time I see Kevin Nash, he's buying sushi and beer. Because
Yeah.
He can afford it.
Yeah, he's doing well. I mean, yeah.
good for him.
Yeah. And he's still married. You know, I don't know how you guys did this. I don't know. I just, who knows? The Wanderer. And by the way, just so you know, guys, I can't say too much bad about Eric Bischoff because he has seen me in action. I can name 2 cities right now that I'm going to throw them out to you right now that Eric will remember this. Jacksonville, Florida. And one night he did come to see me at the Marriott in Baltimore.
I remember nothing.
He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Come on up." Oh, yeah.
I remember nothing.
It's okay. I just know that you got the goods on me, so I got to be easy on you. What are you doing? I said, "I don't know. I'm not at Champions, but come on up." He said, "Well, it's boring down here." I said, "It's not up here. Bring everybody with you."
It would have been a better time if you were on a Casper mattress.
Yeah, right. That wasn't even a mattress. I was just doing my thing. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder what's wrong with me, Eric. I swear to God. I've been checked in, right? So, Eric, I had a 30-day vacation.
Fishing trip.
It didn't help. They thought they could fake me out. I don't think so. Like Austin said, I went fishing for 30 days with no beer. Yeah.
I want to circle back around to merchandise for a minute, Eric. There's been a lot of talk about, what the merchandise was for WWE and how that kind of really catapulted them. And I've always had this theory as a fan that back in the day when they were trying to grow their syndication, they had to pay for TV time. Back before they were getting paid from the national channels, they had to go out and syndicate. And the way you did that is by outbidding WCW and the likes like that to go ahead and play your tape. And WCW never really had to do that because they were owned by a television company, Ted Turner and guys like that. So they had a different type of deal. So I don't think the merchandising was as big of a deal. But if you're selling a TV show, you get to air your own commercials. So why not sell your own product? It was a way to offset what you were paying for television time. And WCW never had that challenge. Is that fair? Or is that just way off base and me just making things up as a fan?
No, I mean, it's partially true. That situation partially existed. And, there's two, and of course, we're talking, back in when I was involved, 94 through 99, WCW and WWE at the time, they could make money off of television, basically 2 ways. Syndication, which was barter. You really didn't, what we did oftentimes was we'd go into a local television market, Huntsville, for example, find a local television station there that was interested in carrying wrestling, and if the if our syndicated show had, 12 minutes of commercial time in it, then the station got to keep 6 minutes of that and sell it to their local advertisers. And WCW or WWE, as in their case, would put together a network of these markets around the country, aggregate that inventory, and then they would sell it, to national advertisers. And that was how syndication worked and how the revenue from syndication worked. So in that sense, WCW and WWE were really exactly in the same spot in terms of receiving income for that particular television show. Now, when it came to cable, that was a different deal because Turner did own the cable outlet, WTBS, that we were on, and that was a much different deal for us, for WCW, than it was for WWE. Had to go out and either buy it on or negotiate a barter or whatever they did. I'm not familiar with how they did it back then, but it was different because Turner owned the outlet that they were on. But those 2 things did everything to do with merchandising. Merchandising is having, hats, jackets, T-shirts, and tchotchkes that you sell either, primarily it's to people who come to the live events, but secondarily it's at retail, on the licensing side of things. It's, nowadays it's on the internet, but that didn't exist back then. So it was really the hats, jackets, and T-shirts component of the business that WCW sucked at. And they sucked at it for a lot of reasons, but primarily because WCW they were a young company, and all of their focus was on just trying to survive in television and trying to get a leg up in television and trying to build their live event business, because it didn't have the consistent live event success that WWE had. So when WWE would go on tour, even back in the 90s, 80s and 90s, and Rick, when you were there, you would have markets where you're putting 10, 15,000 people in an arena. You go to a small market where there's no TV. There's still 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 people. Mm-hmm. When each one of them are spending, $15 a head on hats, jackets, and T-shirts, that's a pretty good day, times 300 days a year or more.
Yeah.
It's a really good day. WCW didn't have that. So that's just not where their emphasis was, because they were such a young, underdeveloped company at that time.
Yeah, it's funny because I've told this story. We had Austin on the podcast, and when I first went back to WWE in 2001, November, I think one of my first shows was Anaheim, and was the Pond. It was sold out, and the guy said to me, "Man, we just had a huge night." I didn't know who it was, but in merchandise, and they said, he was talking about making a T-shirt, and he said, "Yeah, we just had a big night tonight." I said, "What's a big night?" He said, "Well, we sold 15,000 Rock T-shirts, and we sold 14,000 Austin T-shirts, or vice versa." And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, we sold 15,000 Rock T-shirts and 14,000 Austin T-shirts." Unbelievable. Or A or B, in other words, and they were doing that every night. I mean, that the merchandise that Rock and Steve Austin were knocking down back at that time frame. Can you imagine that, Eric? I mean,
yeah,
I'll never forget that statement. The guy said, "Yeah," and then, whatever they do, I mean, there's like DX and all that stuff came along, and the guy, I think the biggest difference, and Eric, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that they go out and they hire people that may not know anything about wrestling, but they know how to market. And WCW was just trying to figure out. I mean, Eric couldn't reconfigure the whole company. I mean, you know what I'm saying, Eric? Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It was just it was an immature. When I say immature, I don't mean that derisively or as a negative statement, but they were immature. They were very, very young. They didn't have the infrastructure. They didn't have the right people in the right place. They didn't have the focus on the right things. And quite frankly, we weren't drawing enough people to our house shows, at least when I got involved in the business side of things. We were drawing 150 people here, 300 people there. We'd have a good house every once in a while by WCW standards. But when you're drawing, 5, 6, 7, 800 people at a live event, you're not going to sell a whole lot of merchandise.
Yeah, well, that's what I was trying to explain when Ole said, "What are you worth to me?" I mean, it's not like they were selling out every night. You know what I mean? And that's just, it sent me over the top, and which is a sad moment for me because I had so much respect for Ole for all those years. But once again, if you've been on that national TV with a company that's really successful and has done very well, and you come back and you're faced with that same stuff again, it's hard to swallow sometimes. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, Eric is our most fascinating guest because Eric knows really kind of the behind the scenes of a lot of the stuff that, has really become folklore in wrestling. And one of the things that people talk about a lot, I guess there's a three-pronged question here for you, Eric, is when you talk about Hall and Nash, there's the talk that, and it's become really popular in the last few years, they got a raise or a bump, as they like to say, for not having the merchandise aspect built into their contract. They didn't get the big, thick statement that Rick even still gets to this day from WWE. Number two, that they got an additional raise because they thought, just because they were on deal sheets and Jim Ross did the angle on Raw in '96, that they were coming back as Razor and Diesel. And then number three, there was the talk about, Hall and Nash at the time, for whatever reason, having a favored nations clause, and anybody else who was hired, they got bumped up. What, if any of that, is complete BS, and what's legit?
Guy, you just lost me. I didn't know any of that. Go ahead, Eric.
Again, let me preface this by saying, I'm pretty good friends with both Scott Hall and Kevin Nash.
Yes, sir.
At this point in time in my life, and I've been friends with them. Kevin and I have always had a very unique relationship. Scott, I've not been as close to Scott. When I was working with him, we've since become close. I admire him for trying to overcome his issues. I understand, I think, a fair amount of what he's been through and what kind of led him into the direction that his life took him. So seeing that he's working really hard at establishing a relationship with his son and his children, I don't know. I respect it. So I see both of them like Rick does. I see him at autograph signings or whatever. So I don't want to say anything to put myself on the outside of that relationship. But I'm going to be honest.
Kevin and Conrad are really close friends.
You asked the question, and I hope that these guys will understand that I'm being as honest as I can be from my perspective. I don't remember the details of their individual contracts. I really don't. So somebody could pull one out and say, "See, Bischoff was lying through his teeth." I'm not trying to lie. I'm not trying to mislead. I'm telling you what I remember. Okay, from what I remember, they got deals that probably made them about the same amount of money that they were making with WWE when they left. Now, this goes back to the merchandise conversation we were just talking about. People say, and I get this all the time to this day, "Oh, you're the guy that, if it wasn't for you, guaranteed contracts would have never happened." And by the way, sometimes they put me over for that. I didn't invent guaranteed contracts. When Rick came back to WCW when I was a third-string announcer, he got a guaranteed contract. I didn't write that contract.
Well, I had a guaranteed contract before I left.
Exactly.
Yeah, the guaranteed contracts came, as a matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize that Crockett had to start guaranteeing money.
With Luger.
With Luger, and when he did that, then the Road Warriors jumped in, and I jumped in real fast.
Yeah, and then when I was in a management position, and we'll talk more just about Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, these guys wanted to make the move. Part of it was financial. Part of it was they didn't like the pay system in WWE. Now, I don't know how it works. I'm certainly not going to say anything adverse to WWE, but it was kind of sort of discretionary at that time. The formula was a mystical kind of thing. You got paid kind of sort of where you were on the card, what everybody thought your contribution was. I mean, there was a formula there, but there was a lot of discretion involved in that formula as well. And the majority, and Rick knows this better than I do, the majority of the money that you would make in WWE back then, and probably to a large degree now, was based on where you were at in the house shows, how many house shows you went to, how much merchandise you sold, what your involvement was in a pay-per-view, where you were on the card. There's a lot of formula that went along with that. In WCW, when someone wanted to come in, whether it was Ric Flair when he came back or Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, I couldn't say, "Okay, guys, well, look at this guy over here. Look at Van Vader over here. Last year he made $300,000 a year just on T-shirt sales." If I said to someone, "I'm going to give you Vince McMahon gives you whatever the percentage is, 5%, I'm going to give you 75% of all of your merchandise sales." Now, if that person had a half a brain or an attorney or a husband or wife, they would go, "Well, give me an example of someone who's selling a lot of merchandise." And then I would sit there and go, "Can't give you one," because we didn't have any. So the only way I could be competitive and pay people close to what they were making in WWE, and in some cases more, was to guarantee the contract. I couldn't share anything with them because there was nothing to share. We weren't making any money at that point.
Yeah.
So, I did guarantee, Scott and Kevin. And I don't remember what the number is, but I think it was like $750. I'm pretty sure it was when they first came in. And, yes, they were able to renegotiate when their contracts were up. But there was nothing that I recall that happened while they were in the middle of a contract that forced me or encouraged me to renegotiate and give them raises. When their contracts were up, yes, if things were going well, numbers were up, they were a big part of it. So, they probably got a raise. But it wasn't because anybody had a gun to my head or anything that Jim Ross did or any kind of backstage, manipulative. People like to talk about that because it makes themselves look smarter, it makes themselves look knowledgeable about certain things. But, the reality is, yes, they got raises when their contracts came due.
So in October of 96, Ross tried to turn heel, so to speak, as his on-air character. And he said he's going to bring back Razor Ramon and Diesel.
Who are currently with WCW.
Right. Well, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were, but WWE owned the intellectual property for the names.
That's why they were inducted.
So they brought a guy in named Rick Bogner and dressed him up like Scott Hall as Razor Ramon. And then they brought in Glenn Jacobs and dressed him up like Diesel. And we know, of course, a little later, Glenn Jacobs became Kane, and now he's a Hall of Famer. But at the time, that wasn't necessarily the case. They had tried him as Isaac Yankem, DDS, the evil dentist, and the whole deal.
Yeah.
So, but the talk is, for years and years, that they're watching the monitor backstage on Nitro, and out come the guys, and they realize that Eric had oversigned them. And supposedly the talk was he had paid them an extra $200,000. He had them on deal sheets at the time. This is the myth. This is the legend. This is the talk online. But he didn't have actual, ink on a contract. And so because of that, Eric was nervous and signed him for an extra $200,000. He just shot all that down. But before now, that's been like urban legend that everybody completely bought into. That he was.
I never heard that. God.
I've heard versions of that, and again. Look, did they each get a raise when their contracts were up? That I would rate that as a highly probable, but I also would unequivocally say it had nothing to do with fear. It had nothing to do with me buying into the bullshit. Sorry about that.
No, great.
That's okay.
Let it go.
Buying into the BS that. Jim Ross, was going to bring them back, and I was going to lose them, and I was afraid, so I gave them something that I didn't have to give them. That's a lot of the typical kind of nonsense that has evolved, as you said, in the urban legend of the wrestling business for over the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
So what about favored nations? Is that a real thing?
I thought about that, in between our calls here. The only person that I can recall that there are two people that I can recall that had favored nations in their agreements was obviously Hulk and Bill Goldberg, and that's because they shared an attorney. And Bill, when Bill started, he was making $75,000 a year at the power plant.
Yeah,
he wasn't making big money. It might have been more than I don't remember, wasn't it? But it was not big money. Okay, he didn't. Really get into the big money until after he had really blown up as a big star. And then Hulk introduced him to Henry Holmes, and then Henry Holmes introduced me to Hell because he was negotiating with both of them, and Henry knew. Henry was very seasoned at what he could push and acquire. And Goldberg was hot as hell. So I'm pretty sure Bill got a favored nations agreement. I doubt that anybody else got one, but hey, if someone can, provide an agreement that says otherwise, I'll be happy to admit that I was wrong, but I don't think so.
Eric, while we're on the topic of contracts, there's a lot of talk that towards the end of WCW, and you may not be super familiar with this, but you may understand the concept of it. Why were there guys on Time Warner contracts instead of WCW contracts? There's the talk online about why that was, but do you know that happened? And if so, what was the thought process behind it?
I have no insight into that at all. And to be honest, this is the first time that I've heard that.
I never heard that either.
Well, the concept was when WCW went out of business, they didn't get everybody's contract. WWE, they. And so it was a deal where guys got paid to sit at home. So you've heard the story for years.
I'm one of them.
So, but the talk was that that would mean if you got paid to sit at home, that WWE didn't really buy your contract. You had a Time Warner contract, and Time Warner didn't go out of business.
Yeah,
WCW did. So if you had a WCW Entertainment contract, then that contract was sold to WWE. Yeah. But if you didn't, then you were on a Time Warner deal.
That would be what Goldberg had too, because he got paid. Goldberg,
Nash, Rick Steiner, a lot of guys.
Whoever. I mean, I don't know who it is, but I did have one of those. I didn't know it was a Time Warner.
You know what? This is the first time I've ever heard that there were two forms of a Time Warner / WCW contract. I certainly hadn't. That didn't occur well under my watch. Now maybe things changed later after 1999 when I left. But this is the first time I've ever heard that.
Well, it's probably because when WCW sold, they weren't in existence anymore. They just had.
Well, but WCW was a subsidiary of Turner Broadcasting, so it's not like WCW went bankrupt, which is another headline. That isn't really true. WCW was a wholly owned subsidiary of Time Warner and Turner Broadcasting.
Yeah.
So the contracts would have been. They would have been connected to Time Warner, Turner Broadcasting. So just because Turner decided to shut WCW down didn't mean that their obligations under their contracts would have just gone away. They would have still had to continue paying those people.
Yeah, well, they did. I mean, I got paid. I mean, I ended up, when I went back to work for WWE,
You took a buyout?
I took a buyout, yeah. But it was, the WWE was generous enough to me at that point in time where it was worth it, and I was tired of sitting home. I was glad to go back and be on camera and all that. So,
and I'm guessing, again, I don't know. I wasn't involved in any of it. Nobody even had a conversation with me about it at the time. But I'm guessing that the WWE probably said at the time, okay, here's these guys that are under, Time Warner WCW contract. We can either bring them in or not. And I'm pretty sure, I would imagine that WWE just decided, it's not worth paying, a Bill Goldberg, whatever Bill Goldberg was making, a couple $1 million a year, whatever it was.
yeah.
It's not worth bringing in certain people. They're not going to inherit that contract if they don't have to.
Yeah.
And some of those contracts probably look like, that's a reasonable deal. Let's inherit that one.
Yeah.
So my guess is it was more discretionary on the part of WWE than some kind of contractual advantage that certain talents had because they had, a Time Warner contract or a WCW Entertainment contract.
Yeah. Hey, so Eric, I'm trying to remember. So was Ted not actively involved in the company at the time that went down?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Ted had stepped back already. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. And step back is putting it mildly.
Yeah.
I think, and I've seen interviews that Ted has done, since that time. Certainly, I don't talk to him anymore. But the whole AOL Time Warner merger was a giant cluster. There's been books written about it. What a disaster of a merger! In fact, the best book that you could possibly read on this subject is a book called "When Fools Rush In" by an author by the name of Nina Monk. And it really describes the cluster, just the politics, the mess, and the financial disaster that AOL, Time Warner, and Turner became. And one of the biggest casualties was Ted Turner himself.
Of course, I heard. That was from AOL, though, right?
It was AOL Time Warner. Ted agreed to the merger and agreed to terms within that merger that effectively took him out of direct control.
Yes.
That he'd enjoyed at Turner Broadcasting. But he did so believing, quite honestly, I think, that he could trust Joe Levin and he could trust the people involved. And immediately after, the merger was finalized, they showed him to his office and said, here, just sit here and, do whatever you want to do, but you're no longer involved in the decision-making process.
Yeah, what a ridiculous decision.
And so when you ask me, Rick, was Ted involved? He had a figurehead title at that time, but he no longer had any operational stroke whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that actually started about 1998 when the whole AOL Time Warner, well, it was actually Time Warner first, but when the Time Warner merger started, percolating, I think around early 98, is when, Ted started really losing gradually, didn't happen overnight, but gradually losing operational control.
Yeah. Well, I can remember you and I talking one day. I think we were at Jocks and Jill's or whatever that place was called.
Yeah, the base of the CNN Center.
Yeah, and this was right at the end, and Eric and I were talking about the fact that the Braves went up for sale, and they wanted $400 million for him, and Ted didn't have the money to pay him. He had the money, but he wasn't going to. And the Braves were his passion. Would you agree, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he went to games all the time, but they went up for sale for $400 million. He didn't buy them, and so it wasn't he didn't have the money, but the right.
It wasn't a good investment at the time.
Yeah, I mean, because he got burnt so bad. I thought it was on AOL stock, but it was a combination of both.
Yeah, well, I mean, when
He took a
Turner,
lot of-
Turner first, the first deal they did was with Time Warner, and then shortly after that, on the heels of that, then AOL came in. I mean, AOL barely exists anymore as it did back then.
Yeah.
You can't even find them on NASDAQ, I don't believe.
Yeah.
But at that time, that was at the time of the internet bubble, Steve Case and AOL. Everybody thought the entire world was going to revolve around them. And the bottom fell completely out of it. I'll tell you how bad it was, not to go too far into the weeds here on business things. But when I left WCW in September of 1999, I had 2.5 years left on my contract. And they sent me home. And I wasn't making the kind of money that Rick made or the kind of money that Talent made, but I was doing all right. I was living there somewhere between $500,000 and $700,000 a year with bonuses and crap like that. But I had acquired over the years a lot of stock options. And at the time, I didn't really know what stock options were. I didn't follow it closely. I'd get these things every quarter, and I'd stick in my file on my desk, and oh, well, I got stock options. Never really paying attention to any of it. Well, when they finally decided to bring me back for a brief period of time after the Russo disaster, while I was still under contract, but they had triggered a clause in my contract that was it's called pay or play. And once you trigger a pay or play provision in the contract, you can't go back and change your mind. You can't say, okay, just go home, we're going to pay out the rest of your contract, and then 6 months later, go, we changed our mind, we're going to bring you back. It doesn't work that way. So when they triggered the pay or play provision in my contract in September of 1999, and then in 2000 decided, whoops, we screwed up, we better bring him back, it gave me leverage to renegotiate my deal. And I said, okay, look, you guys are a mess. I don't want to be an employee. I don't want to be the president of the company. I don't want to be in charge of anything. I'll be a consultant. I'll get involved. I'll be on camera. But I'm not going to be an employee. I'm going to go do other things. And they agreed to that. In fact, they paid me more money. What they did is they bought out my old contract at 100 cents on a dollar. Not 90, not 95, 100 cents on a dollar. And then they wrote me a new contract. They paid it out, terminated it, and then simultaneously wrote me a new contract as an independent contractor. But what happened was when they paid out my previous contract and therefore terminated it in order to enter into a new one, I was no longer an employee. Well, I got a call about a week later from somebody in Turner who says, okay, well, you have 30 days to exercise your options. I didn't even know what that meant. So I go in my file, I get all my stock options out, and I look at it, and I go, holy crap. I got about $1.5 million sitting here. I didn't even know it was in my desk.
Oh, my God.
So my average strike price was around $13. AOL Time Warner stock at the head of the merger was trading for about $98 a share.
Wow.
And I'm just doing the math in my head going, holy crap. I'm really, really doing well here. But I didn't want to sell the stock because every morning it was going up and up and up and up and up. And I'm thinking, man, this is great. Long story short, I didn't have any options. I called an attorney. I hired an attorney. I tried to force them to let me keep my options. None of that worked. I had to sell my stock. I sold it at about $102 or $103 a share, somewhere in there. Maybe under 100, I don't remember, but it was close. And made a boatload of money. And then about 6 months later, AOL Time Warner stock was trading at about 11.
Oh, that's where Ted lost all his money.
Yep. And so did a lot of people.
I already lost like $4 billion.
Yeah. And,
I mean,
and, people like Brad Siegel and, people that were at my level and above me, they're the ones that really suffered the most. They got crushed.
Yeah. Hey, I've got to tell you something, Eric, and interesting in this conversation, and if it hadn't happened, and I can find the name. So I'm on a plane with, and I want to get a comment on this because it doesn't matter to me, and I'm sure you don't care either. I'm on a plane flying somewhere with a woman who is taking her daughter. I'm trying to think where I was going. Her daughter was going to enroll in Juilliard.
Okay, yeah.
In New York City. I must be going to New York, right? So. and her husband worked for Turner. And she goes, I know who you are, and my husband was there while you were there, and I cannot think of his name. And I said, so you'll love this. She said, what did you think of of Harvey Schiller? And I said, I don't know. I didn't know him very well. And she said, he may go down in history as the biggest loser in the history of Turner Broadcasting.
Wow.
Have you ever heard that, Eric?
No, I never did. You know, Harvey. I didn't always get along with Harvey.
No, but I liked him. He was, a nice guy. But I guess they just thought that he was a disaster. This guy has been there forever. He knew Brad Siegel. I mean, the woman knew all the names. And I can't think of. I mean, she knew remember that you had me do a couple speaking engagements for people that were big in the company, and I mean, she knew everybody, like Bill and all those guys. And she said, "What'd you think of Harvey Schiller?" I said, "I didn't know him very well. I mean, he came to Sturgis and all that." And she said, "He'll go down in history as the biggest loser in the history of Turner Broadcasting." And Eric, I'm not asking you to comment on that. I'm just saying that there was a name out of the past. I'd forgotten all about Harvey Schiller. So
yeah, Harvey. Harvey took over for Bill Shaw, and I wasn't happy about that because I really loved Bill Shaw.
Yeah.
And we're still friends to this day. And I was so comfortable with Bill, and there was a trust level
he was
there.
a nice guy.
We had great momentum. We had great momentum together. And then Harvey came in and took over WCW because it fell under Turner Sports, and Harvey was the president of Turner Sports. And Harvey was, former military. I think he was a major in the Air Force. So he was a very, crude cut, very buttoned down, kind of what you would imagine an Air Force major or colonel to be like. And he kind of ran his business like that. So it was a little bit of a conflict with me because I was more of a nonconformist from a corporate point of view. But we ended up really developing good trust together. Harvey was only there for a short period of time, but I will say this. Harvey was a political animal. Harvey saw what was going on at a much higher level at Turner than I did, certainly at a much higher level during the AOL Time Warner merger than I was capable of understanding or exposed to. Mm-hmm. And Harvey I think Harvey really saw himself as the president of Turner Broadcasting to take over Terry McGurk's position.
Yeah.
And
that's right. That was the name I was looking for, Terry McGurk. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he wanted. This
woman knew everybody.
I think he wanted Terry McGurk's job, and it didn't work out for him. But I will say this: Harvey Schiller left with a boatload of money.
Of course.
And he went to work for George Steinbrenner.
Yeah.
And I think he is. I don't want to say he's a member, president, or one of the top executives at the U.S. Olympic Committee, or one of the larger sanctioning bodies in U.S. sports to this day. I just ran into him about 6 months ago at the airport.
I have had such a great time on this podcast, and Conrad, who I say all the time knows more about wrestling than Dave Meltzer, and makes too much money to be this big a fan, but he is. Thinks it's the greatest podcast we've ever done.
It is.
So what I want to do is we aired an hour and 30 minutes here. It'll air tomorrow. And I want to come back to you, Eric, and I want you to tell the world why you fired me for taking Reed to the National Wrestling Tournament. We'll talk about WWE. We'll talk about divided locker rooms. And we can go on forever. It's such a great time. And we'll also discuss why our relationship is so good in life right now. Is that okay with you, Eric?
Sounds perfect.
Okay, guys. Well, Eric, thank you so much. You've been awesome.
Guys, look forward to talking to you both tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Eric. Okay, man.
So, Rick, I know we're going to come back and we're going to do part 2 next week, and we've never, ever done that before, a 2-parter. But this is our biggest guest ever, in my opinion, just because you guys have such an interesting past. Would you agree?
I think it's awesome. I mean, we're sitting here and you guys are discussing stuff I wasn't aware of.
The financial side, the business side. I mean, Eric was really, and he gets crapped on a lot on the internet, but the reality is he helped catapult wrestling to its highest peak and its highest level. Yeah. And but the interaction between you two, whenever I told my friends, you know, my real life, hey, we're going to have Bischoff on the podcast this week, they assumed you guys hated each other, and that's not really the case.
Obviously we've had huge differences, and obviously there was a lot of animosity. The main thing being the thing with my son,
sure,
but there was other components in that, and then the thing that we'll discuss next week is the dressing room conversation where he told everybody.
You never drew a dime.
I didn't draw a dime, and that I was going to break me and all that. So, and I'm sure he'll be honest about it. And it was an emotional deal, you know, and I sat home for a year.
But there's been a lot of personal growth on both sides of the fence, both you and he, and everything's a lot better now. But people want to hear that story, and we kind of didn't mean to, but we kind of set it up for a two-parter here where we're going to talk about that next week. We just covered so much other good stuff, all the NWO stuff. I never knew any of that. I mean, that's really cool stuff, and I think people are going to be into that.
I mean, the merchandise thing, I didn't know either. I mean, he didn't know about those guys buying the merch, or Kevin and that. So
next week, I want to ask him how in the hell Stevie Ray made more than you one year. That's a crazy deal.
Yeah, let's do that. Once next again, week. I'm the only one left without any money, man.
Next week, Woo Nation, come on.
Woo! Tune in.
You're an overbearing asshole. That's right. You're an obnoxious, overbearing ass. Abuse of power. You. Abuse of power. Cut me off. Come on. You will never, ever wrestle abuse of power. You suck. I hate your guts. You are a liar. You're a cheat. You're a scam. You are a no good son of a bitch. Fire me. I'm already fired. Fire me. I'm already fired.
All right, Rick, this week in history, this is one of the biggest moments in wrestling history, certainly in WCW and Ric Flair and Four Horsemen history. It's September 14th, 1998, and after a long hiatus away from WCW, Ric Flair returns to Monday Night Nitro, with Arn kind of being the master of ceremonies, putting together the Four Horsemen again. It's your return to Greenville, South Carolina. The fans just got to hear the impassioned promo you cut on Eric Bischoff. Kind of catch everybody up about what was going on behind the scenes that led to that moment.
Well, it's very simple. I'd sat out almost a year, and WCW had sent me a check each week, even though I didn't have a contract in place. But if I cashed the check, it would mean that I was accepting their conditions. So I ate the checks. I kept them there. But I had come out of pocket about $230,000. You know, the kids were young and they were in private school then. And actually, my friend John, I'm drawing a blank, John Taylor, the attorney, said, Rick, you know, you can just sit this out. You'll be rich because Turner always pays, because I sued them too. And or you can go back and, you know, eat a little crow, but you'll be back at work. Or you can sit home, you know, the rest of your career. So ultimately, I made the right decision to go back. I was miserable within a month later because I was lied to and deceived again. But I got the money, and not the millions I would have gotten from the lawsuit, because, as we've discussed, you can't publicly say you're going to break somebody when you're the president of a company like for Turner Broadcasting, which he did. Break my family, break me, da-da-da-da. Everybody knows that story. So, but that moment was phenomenal. It was very heartfelt, and I didn't miss a beat. The reaction from the fans, Greenville's always been a great market for me. So respectful for the years there. And to be in the ring with Arn and Mongo, and that was very cool. And, we were a featured commodity again, just, for that night. But, the problem is that everybody else looking around, people hated those moments that were so real and so much bigger than what was going on, because we weren't part of the product, if that makes sense.
Well, who do you mean when you say people hate?
Well, I don't want to put their names out there, but everybody was jealous. Who wouldn't be? Who's going to get that kind of a moment? Who's going to go out there and get that kind of reaction from a crowd? I mean, very few people I've ever seen have it. Because I just had that match. Later on, I had a match with Hunter there. Remember that where they carried me around the ring and all that, and Austin came out. I mean, Greenville's a good market for me. So I've been very fortunate to happen the right time. I made the decision to go back, and John was right. I would have sat home. My other attorney in Charlotte wanted to kill me for going back, because he said, you're going to be rich. You'll never have to look around again. People can't do that. But, I decided to go back, and ultimately it worked out for me. And then I got to have another run with the WWE, which was great. So the guys that tried to screw me around, it's like, where are they now?
Right. So talking about that promo that night, did you guys have any sort of parameters or limitations or discussions beforehand about what you were going to say?
Nope.
But you knew Bischoff was going to come down.
Yep.
And he just trusted that you were going to do something good for business, and obviously you did. We're still talking about it all these years later.
Mm-hmm.
So when you walk back through the curtain, is there any discussion with anybody about what was said, or business as usual?
No, the guys loved it. I'll tell you a great story, which I'll never forget, is Rebecca, Sean's wife, who was a Nitro girl at that time, ran up to me. I didn't know her, and said, "That's the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm so happy for you." Isn't that funny?
What was awesome?
Yeah, I didn't even know her, and such a nice person, but to be someone that was, probably like on the outside looking in, not being that familiar with the business, to come and say that to me was pretty cool. I've never forgotten it. She said, "That's the coolest thing I've ever seen." I said, "Thank you." We'll see what I'm doing tomorrow.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Ric Flair, 16 times your World Heavyweight Champion and host of Woo Nation, along with my co-host, very close friend, and the second wealthiest man in the state of Alabama.
Oh, my gosh.
His financial success only is taken over and exceeded by Dr. James Andrews, the most famous orthopedic surgeon in the world. Conrad, welcome back. And
Thanks
today,
for having me, man.
We've never done this before, part 2 of the Eric Bischoff, Ric Flair, WCW story. Hi, Eric.
Hey, Rick, and I want to apologize to all your listeners, because the obvious, the reason that we have a part 2 is because I talked so freaking much and I'm so long-winded that we didn't have enough time yesterday to finish it up. So it's a pleasure to be here again.
No, the problem is we just got going.
Yeah, I don't think it's that you talk too much. I think it's that you guys have such a great history and such a great story. And really, as you've seen some of the reactions on Twitter, people can't believe that you guys are even on a speaking term, much less, doing podcasts with one another. So this is awesome, and we really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you again today.
Well, those fans should be around when we're having a couple beers. They'd really be entertained.
Yeah, there are times I would say we agree to disagree. There are times we just didn't agree. But it was never like we weren't having fun. I don't think we ever, even at the most heated moments, and I'm going to say something which you might agree with, Eric, or not, if you don't want to comment. I think the two guys have put a lot of issues between Eric, and I wrote about it in my book, where Barry, don't tell anybody I told you, Bloom, and Michael, don't tell Barry I told you anything, Braverman.
I agree.
Yeah, and you know what? I want to tell you something. Those guys, they were huge on Roddy Piper, right? Huge. Never showed up in Portland for the funeral. So where everybody else in the world that was close to Roddy did. Michael and Barry did not. Only because they couldn't get something out of him, you know what I mean? And they, all that stuff that went down with you and I, and it finally got resolved with our good friend John
Taylor.
John Taylor, who, by the way, is very sick, Eric. He's got a real advanced Alzheimer's, so he's having a hard time. But John says volumes about where he is, because he was representing Hunter at that time. I mean, he didn't care, and they're all about the money. Nice guys, nice to be talked to and all that, but there was something there that wasn't right. So anyway,
I've got, we'll go back to it, because I know, fans probably want to hear about the issue that, the one that everybody's most aware of between you and I, and it's related to this. But I've got a couple Barry Boom stories that are really fascinating when it comes to the world of entertainment and how quickly things can go wrong. But we can hit on that later on.
Yeah, that's that'll be chapter 3. We got too much to talk about here, man.
Well, since we're already talking about money, we kind of teased at the end of the previous episode, we were going to talk about how kind of the money got out of control in WCW, and there's all kinds of talk online about who got what and the crazy clauses. I even heard recently that Ray Traylor had a pay-per-view bonus for pay-per-view buy rates, even if he wasn't on the show. So it's just weird, crazy stuff like that where guys were getting way more cash than maybe they should have. How do you think that kind of got out of control, and what was the thinking in signing those type deals, or was it just a different time?
Well, it's none of the above. It's BS for the most part. This is the first time I've ever heard that Ray Traylor had any kind of special clause in his agreement. That kind of stuff is just I think what people say to make themselves sound like, they have inside information, or they had some, unique perspective that makes them different than everybody else. But that, so much of what, is out there is just fabricated BS. There were a handful of unique agreements. Hulk Hogan being the first, Bill Goldberg being, another one. And there may have been 3 or 4 more. I don't have everybody's agreements clearly, memorized or have access to them any longer. But I can tell you, other than a very small handful of agreements, there was very little creative structuring of deals. And with all due respect, to Ray Traylor, he was a friend of mine. He took my son hunting. My son, killed his first deer with Ray and Rick Steiner and myself. So this is not set out of anything other than my perspective of what was real and honest at the time. Ray was not a guy that asked for, nor should have asked for, any special consideration. So anybody that has said that was the case is fictionalizing just to make themselves sound smart. It's not true.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, did Ray pass?
Yeah, he did.
No, I know that, of course. But did he pass while working for WCW or WWE?
I think he was just doing independence.
He was basically out of both companies, but
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
He passed away after WCW was out of business.
I really, really liked Ray.
Well, who didn't? Yeah, big boss man.
He was just a guy that you could. He was great to work with. He was easy. He was a pro. He was talented.
Yeah.
You didn't have to spend a lot of time trying to explain to him what you wanted. He had a great instinct for things.
Yeah.
And he just made it fun. He made the business fun.
Yeah, he was a great guy. I remember, I think you can ask Hulk, and Hulk could verify this, but to my understanding, because I used to see those guys from the other side, the Big Boss Man Hulk Hogan feud was one of the biggest drawing feuds of all time. I mean, they were knocking down everything, and the Boss Man was over, and not only was he over, he could work. And when he's a big guy, and Ricky, obviously you have a much better perspective than I do, but as a fan and a non-wrestler, in-ring performer, I loved because he was big, and he looked believable. He didn't look like a guy that was manufactured, in a nuclear power plant. He looked like his character, but he could move, man. For a big guy, he could move. Yeah, the funniest story about him, we're in Richmond one night, and he was the what was he called then when he was with Cornette?
Oh, Big Bubba Rogers.
Yeah, Big Bubba Rogers, right? And he was working with Ronnie Garvin, and Ronnie was pounding him. And he knew because he knew I had worked with Garvin. I really like Ronnie Garvin. But Ronnie he was snug and he was beating up Bubba. I said, Bubba. He said, man, he had a real high voice. He said, I don't know what to do with this guy. That's how he talked, remember?
Yeah.
I said, if I was as big as you, I'd just haul off and hit him right in the mouth. And sure enough, the next time, because Ronnie would be knocking him, beating the crap out of him like he did me, right? But Bubba popped him, man. That was it. Everything was normal.
Man, an understanding.
He came back and pulled me aside and said, thanks, that worked. The next week, he dropped cornet on his head. He jumped off the balcony. Yeah, Ray was a great guy, man. Woo.
So let's talk about the first episode of Nitro. There's kind of a famous story out there that, Eric asked for, a live show on TNT on Monday nights. And Rick, you had just recently, not too long before that, come back from the WWF at the time. And they had kind of launched Raw right as you were leaving. Did you think going head to head, Rick, was a good plan? Or was that something that you didn't have a lot of confidence in initially?
Oh, I thought it was great. I mean, I agreed with everything. I knew, because I don't even know if Eric knows this, but, Brad Siegel called me and, was talking about, we need to get more talent. And I went into a meeting. I don't think Eric was there, and I'm not sure. I think this was right when I first came back, and that's when I said, look, long before you worry about getting talent, because there's talent around, you got to get some announcers coming back in. I mean, that's when they grabbed Bobby and Gene Okerlund. Yeah, I said, you got those guys are as big as an important of the product at WWE. I felt like they were,
right.
And then, of course, they played a big role with us when they came, because there were a lot of talent. It was just, until Eric got going, it was just, we were like old school, like we talked about yesterday with Vern and with Ole, who just, you just couldn't think progressively. But I thought at the time, God, I wanted to be part of it.
Right.
I thought going up against WWE was great. I mean, it wasn't anything that was going to get me in trouble with Vince. He wouldn't care. He's the one that told me to go back to WCW and have fun.
Right.
He looked right at me in Madison, Wisconsin. I remember the town, and said, "Look, I'm going to, I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm going with the youth. I'm going to use younger guys."
So, Eric, a kind of unconventional idea at the time was to have the first Nitro at the Mall of America. How did that deal come about, and what was the thinking inside of putting it there rather than in a traditional arena?
Well, there were a lot of factors, but again, you got to go back in time and kind of look at the context of WCW and where we were at. This was the very first Nitro. I had shut down, for the most part, I shut down the house show business prior to the launch of Nitro. And again, I'm going to go back in time just a little bit more than that, because there's, we leapfrog, from point A to point D, in a lot of interviews like this. And
yeah, I'm guilty of doing that. So, Eric, if I say something that interrupts the train of thought, please tell me to be quiet.
Oh, it happens all the time. I do it myself. It's just there's so much ground to cover, and it's so easy to jump around. But if you go back, if you could freeze frame where WCW was at back in '93, '94, and early '95, prior to Nitro, the narrative that's out there, and it's been, the urban legend. It's not even narrative. That's being too kind. The urban legend that has been created, for so long about me and about WCW and Monday Night Wars. There's just been so much nonsense and intentional, BS. But there's also been, people just are human, and people tend to remember things the way it's most comfortable for them to remember. And I'm guilty of that as well. So I want to make that clear. But for me, I go back and I look at that time, and when people say, Bischoff, he had an open checkbook, I call BS on that. That's not true. When I took over WCW, it was a $24 million a year company, grossing $24 million a year, and it was losing $10 million a year in the profit. That's when I got the keys. Within 36 months from then, approximately, we were a $300+ million company, spinning off $50 to $80 million in revenue, depending on whose accounting you wanted to look at. But before the launch of Nitro, again, early 95, my goal was to cut costs everywhere I could. And you can go back and listen to interviews from, listen to Triple H talk about the fact that I called him a GUD, a G-U-D. And that was my acronym for geographically undesirable, because we couldn't afford to fly him in. That was, and Triple H will go back and tell you that story of his first, conversation with me when he came into WCW. He probably took that as a little bit of an insult, but that was where we were. We were tightening our belts so much because we didn't have the money to spend. I cut down on house shows because everybody that was running the house show, the live event business prior to me taking over, they knew they were losing money every time they went out the door, but their approach to fixing that, it's kind of like Democrats, is let's just go spend more money. Let's do more house shows. I know we lose, let's say we lose $1,000 every time we do a house show, but here's how we're going to fix it. We're going to do 500 more of them. Well, I suck at math. I don't even carry a checkbook, but I can figure that math out. So while I was cutting and gutting and really trying to get control of cost, at the same time, the executives above me at Turner Broadcasting started seeing things start slowly to shift in the right directions. As things started to shift, they started giving me more and more latitude. I still had to go before the executive committee and present, a budget, 1 year at a time, and they would go through it line by line by line, and they would challenge me on every single aspect of it. Conrad, you're a businessman. You know what that's like.
Yes, sir.
And that's what I went through. But I was proving the plan as I went, which is why there was money in the budget for Hulk Hogan. It's why Ted Turner was willing to take a chance, because he was starting to see that, indeed, there was light at the end of the tunnel. So when Nitro came about, and by the way, I didn't ask for that. That was thrust upon me. and I walked out of a meeting with Ted Turner when he said, Eric, go do primetime Monday night on TNT. That was I had no idea that was coming.
I was just going to say, I remember you coming and telling me we're going to go live on Monday night, because he suggested that to you, right?
Yeah, I was literally. I'll take a short time explaining this, but I was at a meeting. We were so close, and again, going back to what I was just previously talking about, we had been cutting costs. We had been cutting back on travel. We had cut down the house show business because it was losing money. We did our tapings down at Disney because actually it was more affordable than than flying people in and going and doing, arena shows around the Southeast. Believe it or not, it was actually cheaper because there were economies of scale there. So, that's when, we got the money to start moving things. But we were so close to being profitable, and it would have been the first time in the history of WCW since Ted Turner acquired, the then bankrupt NWA, that the company would turn a profit. And I knew if I could make $1, I didn't have to make $1 billion. I didn't even have to make $100,000. If I could be the guy running the company when it made its first dollar of profit, I knew I'd be gold, because I'd be reaffirming Ted's belief in this franchise, in that franchise. So that was my only goal. And again, now to get to the real answer to your question, WCW, we would go to television tapings in Gainesville, or we'd go to Greenville, or we'd go to Charlotte, or wherever. You pick a city in the Southeast. And, nobody in WCW before I got there and while I was there really early on had any idea how to promote. And they they did a horrible job. And we would go to a TV taping, and there'd be maybe 600 or 800 people in the building, maybe 1,200 people in the building. And we would have papered 90% of it. They weren't paying customers. So on television, when you're looking at this show, and you're in an arena, but you don't want to see empty seats, so what do? You turn the lights down. You conceal the fact as best you can that you've got 1,500 people, maybe, 1,200 of them, happen to get a free ticket on their windshield, 2 hours before the show. They weren't really fans. Small handfuls were, ringside were, but for the vast majority of our television tapings in 93 and 94, we couldn't draw flies if we rolled ourselves in honey. And when Nitro, ended up on my lap, I knew I couldn't go to an arena because I knew I couldn't fill it, and it would look like crap. And that was our biggest problem. Our show, WCW, just visually, we didn't, to this day, I just admire the hell out of Kevin Dunn and Vince McMahon and the entire team of people underneath them, because that show has just set the standard forever. And in terms of production qualities, to this day, it does. And when you compare, you go back in 93, 94, and you look at the WCW televised product and you compare it to what WWE was putting out at the time, there is no comparison. It's just, there is none, or was none. So I knew I had to go somewhere unique. I had to visually look stimulating. I had to be cool to look at. I had to be able to achieve that knowing that I couldn't put 10,000 people in a building, or even 5,000, or even 3,000. So that's when the idea, I had been to the Mall of America. It was the biggest mall in the United States or in the world at that time. It was getting a lot of press. And I remember that big rotunda, and I just visualized the camera angles and the fact that it would look cool as hell, and there'd be people there, because it's in a mall, for crying out loud, but it wouldn't be dependent upon me going out and selling tickets or us doing what we normally did, which was paper houses. That's how we ended up at the Mall of America. It was really out of necessity. It wasn't some great idea and some vision or, any magic rabbit that I hadn't had. It was just like I had a gun to my head, and I had to achieve one thing, knowing that I was up against a lot of things that would make that difficult.
And what most fans remember about that first Nitro is Lex Luger coming back. And Rick, you've actually said on the show before that you thought that Luger came back for a huge contract. But Eric wrote in his book that really wasn't the case. What's your guys' perspective on that? And Eric's debunked a lot of WCW myths so far. What was the situation with Luger coming back? Longtime fans remember his contract was up with WWF at the time, but they didn't know that he would be making an appearance on Nitro because it was just by a day or so. Is that right, Eric?
Yeah, and I don't, obviously I wasn't on the WWF side of the equation. And, Bruce Pritchard and I have done a lot of shows together where we, kind of debate the Monday Night War. Him from his perspective is one of Vince's top guys, in the kind of creative side of things and operation sides of things. And then, of course, me on the other. So it's an interesting take, and I've actually learned a lot. Each time I do one of these with Bruce, I learned, a little bit of something new. But based on what I understand, Luger's contract was up. I believe Vince thought that he had a verbal agreement, or if it wasn't Vince, it was somebody else, that was high up in the food chain, believed that they had a handshake or at least an understanding with Lex, and Lex knew he was coming to WCW. From my perspective, and that's how, Lex was able to make that move and surprise everybody on the WWE side. From my perspective, I've learned a lot. I'm still learning. Every day I learn something at 60. And one of the things I've learned about myself and tried to get better at is forgiving things and people and myself as well. And I want to say that about Lex Luger because I resented him really up until the last year or two. I had a lot of resentment towards him because of what happened with Elizabeth. And my wife was very friendly with Elizabeth and Janie Angle, and she used to come out to our place here in Wyoming and go fishing and things. So when Elizabeth died, it affected me, and it didn't affect me as much, but it affected my perspective on Lex. And I held on to that for a long time, and like I said, up until about a year or two ago, and finally just got over it. But even long before that, when I was just an announcer, and I was a third-string announcer that just batted cleanup for Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone, that was my role, and I was grateful for that role. And I didn't really interact with Lex all that much. I did occasionally. I would do an interview with him and things like that. But I watched Lex, and he was very arrogant. And I don't think he meant it, really. I don't think he thought of himself as highly as he came off. I understand things better now. But the vibe that he gave me, and probably a lot of other people, is that he was so full of himself. Like that narcissist gimmick that he went to the WWE with wasn't a stretch for him. There was not a lot of acting involved there, really.
Yeah. No, that's that. I'm just going to comment for 1 second. You're accurate. That was his it used to drive everybody crazy. I mean, it didn't affect me because I was the guy that was getting them over. And he was easy to work with. But everybody was mad at me because I had to do such ridiculous stuff with him in lieu of the fact that he hadn't learned how to wrestle that well, which is kind of the deal with Bill Goldberg. You know, I mean, they didn't have to learn how to really work because they were put in a position. And as in my role, they're looking at me and going, he's in the main event with you tonight. You got to draw a house. So I'm going to go out there and do whatever I can do. Because, I mean, I'm trying to feed myself, but I'm trying to feed everybody else on the card. You get what I'm saying, Eric, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and he always respected me, but I won't mention names. He had everybody upside down because he talked about himself in the third person. You can't say to Jack Mulligan, why would a Lex Luger put over a Dutch Mantel? Why would he even wrestle Dutch Mantel? I don't know. You're lucky Mulligan didn't swat you.
Well, and for me, when Lex left, it was like good riddance. You know, I never. Again, this is me personally now, more than professionally. But personally, when I say that, I mean as someone who just liked to watch the product and loved the wrestling side of things. I didn't think Lex. I just didn't see it in him. I didn't think he. I never liked watching him as a performer. I didn't, and part of it was probably because I didn't like him as a person. But to me, it didn't mean much. So when he left, it was like good riddance. Glad he's not on my hands. I'll be somewhere else. But it wasn't one of who I do, and to this day, have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for. But you know, then I was working with Sting every day, and we had a good relationship. And so, still do it to this day. We're not close by any stretch. I don't talk to him, but if I see him or when I worked with him, in the past, always good relationship. But at that time, Sting and Ric Flair were two. That was it.